of tomato season. Look at these beauties from my garden. We have an abundance of tomatoes, and that was intentional. I was wanting to start preserving a lot of my own tomato products because we use them so frequently. So we planted quite a few tomato plants this year, and now everything's starting to ripen up, and so I'm starting to make different things that I can or freeze and preserve for the winter. So today I thought I'd share with you oven roasted marinara. Now, I'm going to show you how to can it up, but if you're not a canner, that's totally fine. You can freeze it, but it is so good and really, really delicious. So what we're going to start with is you need a large onion. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to chop this up, and we're going to put it on a cookie sheet, and we're going to go ahead and get it in a 375-degree oven, and we're going to basically let the onions caramelize in the oven. So you need about 1.5 cups of onion, which that's about what this really large sweet onion will be. I'm so excited to share this recipe with you. I made a batch yesterday and it just turned out delicious. Now I do want to say that anytime you are going to can something, please make sure that you follow all the proper procedures and canning guidelines, and that you use a recipe that is approved for canning. I got this recipe from the Ball Canning book. I did make one minor change, which I know you're not supposed to do that, but I didn't really add anything questionable. The sauce was delicious, but it wasn't as thick as I'd like it, so the only thing that I changed was adding some tomato paste, and I'll show you that later on in the recipe. But if you're not canning this, you don't have to worry about what changes you make to it. So if you want to make your own changes or additions and you're not canning it, that's totally fine. But this is a good base recipe, and you could add all kinds of things to it if you're not going to can it. Again, if you are going to can it, please do not modify the recipe. I don't want to be responsible for making anybody sick, and I'm following the recipe pretty much to the T. All I did was add some tomato paste to make it a little bit thicker. And roasting your tomatoes and the onions in the oven just really adds a lot of flavor to this marinara. So I've got my onion chopped, and I just chopped it kind of big. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it on a baking sheet. I've got my oven preheating to 375 degrees. Now, the recipe calls for just spraying your cookie sheet with cooking spray, and I tried that, and I didn't really, the onions felt too dry. So I did end up adding some olive oil, so that's why I'm adding olive oil here. I like my onions nice and coated. But the recipe, if you are familiar with it, it's in the new Ball Book of Canning. It does say to just spray your cookie sheet with cooking spray, but for me that wasn't enough, so I'm going to use a little bit of olive oil to help us out a little bit. Okay, that's going to go in our 375-degree oven here in just a minute. But I wanted to show you, the next thing you're going to want to do is get your tomatoes in a roasting pan to roast. So what you're going to do is, obviously you're going to wash them. This recipe does not call for pre-blanching them. We're going to roast them in the oven with the skins on, but you want to cut them. I have several different types of tomatoes, and the recipe does say, it says to use plum tomatoes, but then in a note it does say that you can use heirloom or any type of tomato you want, and you can mix them up for a different flavor profile. So I have a combination of just regular tomatoes, and then I also have plum tomatoes. I planted the San Marzano tomatoes, which are a variety of a plum tomato, and those are tomatoes that have less juice in them, and the San Marzano is supposed to be the creme de la creme of that type of tomato, and really good for making sauces and marinara. So I've got, like I said, those, San Marzano plum tomatoes, and then I have a combination of cherry tomatoes and several different varieties that we planted. So I'm going to use a variety of tomatoes here. So it's entirely up to you. If you have plenty of the plum type tomatoes, by all means, use all plum tomatoes. If you do that, you may find that you may not need the tomato paste to thicken it up, but that's entirely up to you. And if you're fine with the texture of your sauce when we get to that point, that's fine. So what we're going to do is just start chopping tomatoes, and you want about 20 pounds of tomatoes, and that's approximately what I have here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my onions in the oven. It'll take about 20 minutes for those to roast. While I'm chopping my tomatoes, you do want to stir your onions occasionally, and you want them to start turning golden brown, and then we're going to take those out of the oven and put our tomatoes in. So I'm going to start chopping, and I'll bring you back when we get to the point that the onions are done and the tomatoes are ready to go in. Okay guys, welcome back. My onions roasted in the oven at 375 degrees for about 20-25 minutes until they got a nice gold color to them. I'm going to show them to you so you can see. That's what you want your onions to look like. So we're going to set those aside. While those were roasting, I finished chopping all my tomatoes, and my roasting pan is full. Can you see? Look how beautiful. Love, love, love fresh tomatoes. And I can tell you, when I made this recipe, I've never had a pasta sauce that tasted so good. So there's something about picking your tomatoes and roasting them all up. Roasting does bring out the flavor of the tomato and the sweetness of it. So it really makes the flavor profile really, really nice in this recipe. So I encourage you to give it a try. So what I'm going to do now is put my pan of tomatoes in the 375 degree oven. And because I put them in this large roasting pan and they're not in a single layer, it's going to take at least an hour to do them. If you want them to roast faster, you can do 2 pans or 2 sheets in your oven and just make them a single layer. But I found that this works fine, and I didn't have to dirty 2 pans, and it worked. So what we're looking for is your tomatoes will start to break down. You'll see a lot of juice in the bottom, but we want them to roast until the tops of them start to turn just a little bit golden brown. So that's going to take about an hour. So I'm going to go ahead, put those in, get those roasting, and then I'll bring you back and show you what's next. One thing I did want to mention, and I think I did mention this previously, but I just want to go over it again. When the onions were in the oven roasting, I did stir them periodically, like every 5 minutes or so, 8 minutes or so. I just give them a stir so that they didn't burn. We want things to roast, not burn. And I'm going to do the same thing with the tomatoes, but that's going to take longer in between stirring, so maybe every 15 minutes. Just give it a little bit of a stir. And just make sure things on top aren't burning and things on brown are not roasting. So we want everything to be as equally cooked as possible, evenly cooked as possible. So you do want to give things a stir every now and then. So our onions are good. Our onions are done. Tomatoes are doing their thing in the oven, and I'll bring you back when we're ready to move on. Okay guys, we're back. Our tomatoes are all done roasting and we're ready to move on. But I want to bring you in close, so forgive the wiggling of the camera, but I want to show you what you're looking for when you're roasting your tomatoes. So I hope you can see this okay. Maybe better with the light off. See how the skins are starting to move away from the edge of the tomato, and if you look real close you can see how the tops, the edges of them are just starting to slightly brown, and that's what you're looking for. And it took about an hour to do this many tomatoes. Again, it was 20 pounds. Now if you do this on 2 separate baking sheets like we talked about, sorry for the wiggling. It won't take as long as an hour, but I did it like I showed you in the big, my big roasting pan, because that seemed to be what was best for me. And so it took a little over an hour to do that, but they're all good to go now, and that's what you're looking for, is a little bit of goldenness on the edges and the skin starting to come off of the tomato. So now what we're going to do is we're going to use this guy. And if you're not familiar with this little kitchen gadget, I'm sure you've seen one in your grandma's kitchen. It is a food mill. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take all of our tomatoes into a stock pot, but we don't want the seeds and we don't want the skin. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ladle the tomatoes in batches into the food mill. And if you're not familiar with how it works, I'll just give you a little quick run through on that. Just put in some of your tomatoes, a couple scoops, and then you're going to turn your food mill clockwise, and it's going to remove the skins, and you're going to get the pulp of the tomato without hopefully many of the seeds and the skins. And this is a little bit of a process, and it takes a little bit of time, but we're basically straining our sauce, getting rid of the part that we don't want and getting the parts that we do want into our stock pot. So this is going to take me, I don't know, 10-15 minutes or so to do this. And like I said, you rotate it clockwise, and then every now and then go counterclockwise just to loosen everything up and make sure that you're getting all of the pulp of the tomato to come out of the food mill and into your pan. So I'm going to do that off camera because it takes a while to do it, and for time's sake, I'm sure you don't want to sit here and watch me do all these tomatoes. So I'm going to go off camera, I'm going to do this, and then I'll bring you back and show you how to make our sauce. Okay guys, I've finished processing my tomatoes in the food mill, and this is what we have. If you can see that good enough, but to me that's really thin. So like I said, the recipe said that you could use heirloom tomatoes or whatever combination of tomatoes you wanted, but I'm thinking if you used all plum or paste tomatoes, it might be a little bit thicker, but this is looser than what I like my marinara to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 2 cans of a high quality organic tomato paste. And when I did that the last time I made this, it made the texture perfect for me. So we're going to put in, and it's entirely up to you. We're going to simmer this some too, so it will reduce down. It's all what kind of texture you want. But like I said, if you are going to can this, be careful not to change the recipe too much. I'm pretty much going by what the ball canning book said you should do for this recipe. But anyway, I did want to tell you that one of the really nice side effects of roasting your tomatoes and your onions to make the sauce is it makes your house smell absolutely amazing. It smells so good in here. All right, so I turned my heat on. My tomato sauce is in the pan. I turned the heat up to medium, and now I'm adding the 2 cans of tomato paste. We're going to add 6 cloves of garlic, minced. If you don't like that much garlic, you can certainly adjust that a little bit. That's not going to hurt anything. And if you're not canning this, you can finish this up any way you want to. Anything that you like in your pasta sauce or marinara sauce, feel free. But if you're canning it, stick to this recipe as closely as you can. 1 tablespoon of oregano, I'm sorry. And that's about all I have left in this jar. So we're going to pour that in. We have a tablespoon of oregano. We're going to do a teaspoon of summer savory. And again, these are all dried herbs. A teaspoon of marjoram. The recipe calls for 2 bay leaves, but I use the Spice Island brand of spices, and their bay leaves are really strong. And it even says on the jar to break them into thirds. So I'm only going to use 1 bay leaf here, not 2. But that's kind of up to you, how much you like bay leaf and how much of that you want to put in. The recipe calls for salt, but I'm going to use seasoned salt. I like the extra flavoring that's in seasoned salt, and it says a couple of teaspoons. So I'm just going to use a couple of teaspoons of seasoned salt. And you can adjust that. It's not going to hurt anything to adjust your seasonings a little bit. And then about a teaspoon or 2 of freshly ground black pepper. And then, last but not least, sorry, you're looking at the back of my head, we're going to add the onions that we roasted. Okay. Get rid of my little spatula there. Probably good. I'm just going to use the spoon. And we're just going to give that a nice stir. And then we're going to bring this up to a simmer, and we're going to let it simmer for around 20 minutes. So all the flavors have a chance to meld together, and it reduces some. Now the other ingredient that you can add if you want, I didn't add it because I didn't have any and it tasted delicious without it, but the recipe does say that you can add some, I believe it's a cup of dry red wine. I'm not adding that, but if you want to, you can. And again, that's part of the recipe. Now again, if you're not canning this, you can do whatever you want, but if you're canning it, please try to stick as close to the recipe as you can. Canning is a lot of fun, but you have to be careful. You don't want to make anyone sick, and so I always follow the canning guidelines, and I always use a tested recipe. So I think that that's important, and if you make people sick, it defeats the purpose of preserving it to begin with. And canning is a fun hobby. If you've never given it a try, I would encourage you to do so. It's not hard. You just have to follow correct procedures. So I'm going to let this do its thing. Come up to a simmer. We're going to simmer it for 20 minutes, and then I'll bring you back and we'll talk about what to do next. See you in a bit. Okay guys, welcome back. Our sauce has been simmering 20-25 minutes or so. I went ahead and tasted it to make sure I had it seasoned the way I like it, and it's pretty spot on. I did add a tiny bit more seasoned salt. So at this point, just make sure you taste it and adjust your seasonings however you like them. Now at this point, like I said, you have a couple of options. You can go ahead and use it up if you have a lot of people to feed and you need to make a lot of pasta, or you can freeze it. When I freeze things, I like to use the Ziploc freezer bags because I can lay them flat, and they stack nicely in your freezer, so there's a space saver. You can also freeze in ball mason jars. They are freezer friendly. There's a multitude of plastic containers that are for the freezer out there. Or you can can it, which is what I'm going to do next. So if you're not going to can it, I hope you give this recipe a try, and you're done here. If you are going to can it, I hope you'll watch my next video, because that is what I'm going to do, is show you how to can this up and preserve it for later use. So if you are going to can it, the one thing we do need to add is citric acid. So as my final step, that is what I'm going to do. I need 2 teaspoons of citric acid. And then I'm just going to stir that in, and then my sauce is good to go. So you just can't beat this. The roasting your tomatoes, first of all, they were picked fresh this morning, which helps it, that is just, you can't beat the flavor of picking something fresh out of the garden and processing it that same day. You just can't get that good of flavor any other way. Roasting your tomatoes and your onions brings out wonderful flavor and the sweetness of them, the natural sweetness of them, and just adds a really nice depth of flavor to your sauce. So I hope you'll give this recipe a try. I appreciate you coming along with me today. If you have questions about the recipe or about canning or preserving your sauce, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Like I said, I'm going to have videos on canning, and I have some other ideas coming up. I apologize if there was a lag from the last video till now, but there's been a lot going on in life, so I just haven't really had much of an opportunity to get videos out there, but I've got more coming. So I hope you go out and have a great day, and as always, thanks for watching.